Serious and Silliness Outcasts. All right, like, share, subscribe, please. I appreciate each and every one of you watching my content, but today is a little bit different. Every once in a while, I do a review of another video or another interview or another sit down or whatever you want to call it on something that would involve the content that I give you. So I watched the conversation interview, if you want to call it, with Michael Franzese and Andrew Tate. And let me begin by explaining how impressed I am by Michael Franzese. Okay. Let me explain. Everybody knows Michael Franzese, his backstory, that he was a mafia boss in the Colombo crime family from the late 70s into, I believe, the early 90s, made a ton of money with a tax scam with gasoline, and everybody knows the backstory and so on and so forth. And he was probably one of the top earners probably in mafia history, really. Goes to prison, makes a complete turnaround, becomes a devout Catholic, and starts his YouTube channel, and he is pushed into this mafia genre, right? Which everybody loves, which is fine. Well, Michael Franzese now has transcended himself from this mafia genre YouTube personality to being one of the largest YouTube channels on YouTube. This conversation that he had with Andrew Tate, first of all, was 2 hours and 45 minutes long, and it has almost 3 million views. Those are Joe Rogan numbers. Michael Franzese is the only personality in the mafia genre from YouTube that can do this. He has the intellect. He is not just a street thug. Look, I understand where these guys come from. They come from the street. They have a lack of education. There are a lot of them, they kind of just can't pull this off. Well, Michael is a special kind of personality. He's more than just a, mafia personality. He is able now to have people like Andrew Tate on his channel, Mike Tyson on his channel, Tristan Tate on his channel, George Christie, Jordan Peterson. He is now one of the top YouTube platforms. Sammy Gravano can't do that. He will never be able to do that. And even the majority of people, actually, even all of the guys that I've interviewed from the mafia genre can't do what he does. And it's not that they can't. They're just not able to grow their channel that way. Michael Franzese seems to have gained the respect of everyone around him, if that makes sense. It's not that, a guy like Sammy Gravano doesn't have respect, or John Elite doesn't have respect, or Anthony Ruggiano doesn't have respect. People respect him. But in Michael Franzese's case, he has become a major player in not just the mafia genre, but pretty much everything that he touches. And I have to believe that this is by design. I have to believe that he knew that he was going to use his reputation as a boss in the mafia world, become a YouTube channel, and then catapult that into something greater, because that seems to be all he does. Everything this guy touches turns to gold. He has an ability to become the best at whatever he does, which tells me he's a very special kind of person. He is not your average street thug. And to be quite frank, he never was. He was so lucrative and he was so profitable when he was a mafia boss. He actually tells a story about when Vinny the Chin tried to bring him over to his family. He said it on Valuetainment, which everybody knows is my favorite story, favorite podcast, favorite story, which is my Valuetainment, which is my favorite podcast, my favorite YouTube channel. Now, a couple of things before I get into the actual topics. These two guys sat down. He flew to Romania to be in the presence of Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate, so they could sit down over there and so on and so forth. I think they refer to it as the compound. You could tell these guys had mutual respect for each other. But, and this is what is so impressive about Michael Franzese, Andrew Tate, you could kind of tell, held him at a higher standard than the majority of other hosts from podcasts. And you could kind of see it. It wasn't Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate was not nervous around him. No, I'm not saying that. Andrew Tate was not poised. I'm not saying that. He was very poised. He was very articulate. He had tremendous worldly views. He seems to be a tremendous intellect, as well as Michael Franzese. But there were times where Andrew wanted to know about him and ask him a question. And toward the end, he did. He asked him a question about the underworld and the mafia in New York. And he asked him, you know, what did you do with all the money that you made? And he said, can I ask you a question? And when you kind of turn the tables a little bit like that, when you're supposed to be the one that is being interviewed and you're supposed to be the one that's under the spotlight that everybody wants to see, but you say, I would like to ask you a question. That kind of shows me that he understands that he's in the presence of a major player, just like him, or maybe even a little bit better than him. And he actually says to him, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. Don't get yourself in trouble. And I've said this to people that I've interviewed, you know, people in the underworld, bikers, mafia guys, whomever else I've interviewed, because I want to treat them with respect. So I understand where they're coming from. I've said, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, because I want them to understand that I'm holding them in high regard. And there were a couple of times where Andrew Tate did that with Michael Franzese, but Michael never did that to Andrew. Michael was polite. Michael was respectful. Michael was a good host, but he never said to him, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. Or can I ask you a question? It was never something like that. And the way Michael carries himself in this conversation, because it wasn't an interview, it was a conversation. The way Michael carries himself, he's just very poised. He's very comfortable in his skin. He's very, very well spoken. Not as well spoken as Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is a tremendous grasp of the English language. But he's good enough to sit with these people and be as well spoken as them. And that's exceptional coming from the background he comes from, the streets of New York, a mafia guy. You know, most of those guys sound, let's face it, not intelligent, not educated, but not Michael. He's able to spar with these people. He's able to have an intellectual spar with them. And the other good thing about Michael Franzese as well is he knows when not to cut the person off. He's a good host. He's not a great interviewer. He's a good host. So if Andrew Tate is going off on some topic, which he did throughout the interview, Michael just lets him rock. Go right in. Just lets him speak. I've done this. Joe Rogan has done it. Patrick McDavid's done. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not putting myself in that category. But what I'm trying to say is, you have to know when a person is comfortable in the interview and they're talking. You don't really have to pry it out of them. If they're comfortable, it's going to come out. You just let them speak. And the more comfortable that comes out, the more comfortable they are, the more they're willing to tell you in detail more and more information. And that's what I respect about Michael Franzese, is he has the same demeanor as a Valuetainment, as a PBD rather, or a Joe Rogan, or Whom else is a great interview? Those two guys are basically the ones that come to mind. The more comfortable you make the person, the more they are going to feel comfortable speaking about things that might be uncomfortable talking about. The other thing that I want to talk about was the Andrew Tate. This is the first time you actually see Andrew Tate was a 3-time world champion kickboxer. If you don't know his backstory, everybody knows his backstory. Same thing like Michael. Andrew Tate was a 3-time world champion kickboxer, and then they got into the webcamming business with females, and then I believe he opened casinos in Romania. But you could clearly see he was a fighter because this is the first time you could actually see his hands up close, and you could see his knuckles, and you could see his knuckles have been broken and bruised, and so on and so forth. You could see he's got fighters' hands. He's got fighters' knuckles, right? The other thing that was very surprising is here are 2 different men from 2 different parts of the world with 2 totally different world experiences. And the topics that they talked about, they almost 100% of the time agreed on. And the reason for that is, I don't care what part of the world you're from. But if you are a person that's comfortable in their masculinity and comfortable in their own skin and can think rationally and have a masculine frame of mind, when these topics come up, odds are you are going to agree with them. It's usually the mind that has been altered of the topics that they talked about that you're not going to agree with. What I mean by altered is like, like a young man in college, or feminism, or the male feminist, or somebody that just kind of like just swallows the everyday nonsense that's fed to them by mainstream media and can't think through it themselves. But these 2 guys, what was so surprising is on almost every topic, and the only topic I think that they disagreed on, excuse me, the only topic I think they disagreed on, and everything that they disagreed on, which I think was only one thing, they still respected each other for, which I admire. I don't like interviews like a Bill O'Reilly where he screams and yells, or Bill Maher where he kind of holds you in contempt and he kind of deflects the question because he doesn't agree with you. I hate those kind of interviews. I hate those kind of people. I hate those kind of interviews. I hate them. When you respect the person you're interviewing and you make them feel comfortable, vice versa, and even the host, and you have this intellectual banter, it always comes across comfortable and respectful, and it allows the person to put together their thoughts clearer and precise. So I think the only thing that they actually disagreed on was that Andrew Tate has become a Muslim about 2 to 3 years ago, and Michael Franzese is a devout Catholic, a devout Christian. So they discussed, this was more toward the end, they discussed why Andrew Tate became a Muslim as opposed to a Christian, because Tristan Tate is a Christian, his brother. And they go into it. And then Michael goes into why he believed in Christianity. And they both had really good, deep insight to why they chose the religion. And it was really fascinating. With Michael Franzese, he actually said that he spent 29 months in solitary confinement. And the only thing that he could have that stimulated him was the books that his wife sent him. And he had his wife sent him all different types of religious texts and different types of books and so on and so forth. And that's when he became a devout Catholic. In that time where he was by himself with nobody else, he actually made that time work for him, which takes a very strong mentality to do that. The majority of people that are locked up in solitary confinement for 29 months, which is over 2 years, would mentally break. My God, imagine being locked up for that. How many push-ups and sit-ups could you do? So the only thing he could do was read, and reflect on himself and try to realize what he had done wrong and what he is going to do to make himself a better person when he gets out of prison. I believe he did 8 years in prison, a little over 8 years. Where Andrew Tate, his reasoning for going toward the Muslim religion was that he was living this hedonistic lifestyle for a very long time. He became very rich. He had loads of women. He was drinking. He was smoking. He was doing drugs. He was partying. And it got to the point where he realized that he wasn't being fulfilled in life. He realized that there was got to be something more than just trying to fill your soul with drugs and women and these hedonistic rituals, if you will. And he decided that he was going to explore religion and what religion brings to him. So obviously the first one was Christianity, but he said when he went to the countries that were predominantly Muslim, he was able to feel the religion more so than in the Christian countries. And then the more he read and he actually educated himself on the Muslim religion, the more he realized how similar it is. Now, I didn't know this, but basically the Muslim religion is the Bible, but then they actually add one more prophet, which is Muhammad. And they believe in Jesus Christ, and they believe Jesus Christ was a great prophet, and so on and so forth. And that was the difference. The Christian religion believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and without his acceptance, you can't get into heaven. And that was the major difference between Michael Franzese's reasoning for being a Christian and Andrew Tate's reasoning for being a Muslim. So I actually do recommend everybody go and watch this.
Faith without works is not, it's meaningless. But let me ask you, very interesting, because you said you believe Jesus is coming back, and yet you're Islam.
So does Islam.
They do?
Yeah.
So they believe that Jesus is the Son of God?
Yeah.
Okay.
They believe he was a messenger.
They don't believe he's the Son of God?
I have to be, I don't want to say anything incorrect, because if I say anything incorrect, the Muslim world jumps all over me. But they do believe he was a messenger. They believe he was a prophet, along with Muhammad and along with Moses. They believe in a lot of the same things. I guess the very simplistic way to understand or explain Islam is they believe in the Bible. They believe in all of it. They just wrote one more book afterwards by one more messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him. And in his book, he said, Christians are right. Everything's right. But there's also this part.
Now, they sat down for 2 hours and 45 minutes, and they talked about a ton of topics, which oddly enough, they agreed on 99.9% of them. And I gave you my reason why earlier. So they actually start off about, immigration.
I don't know how the immigration system is here. I know it's pretty bad in the UK, but you got to see how it is in America. We have probably 15 million people that have come into the country. And, I spoke recently to 850 Border Patrol agents in Texas.
Yep.
And they told me, Michael, you have no idea. We have no idea who's coming into this country. We don't know how many have gotten away. We don't know how much drugs is coming in. They have no idea.
How much human trafficking is taking place.
Human trafficking, the whole bit.
Yeah, it's scary. And it's scary, one, because of the situation, but it's really scary when you understand it's by design. I don't believe it's an accident. You don't have to have any degree of a functioning brain to understand that a nation requires a border. You can't sit and believe you have a nation without a border.
It's not a nation at that point.
It's not a nation anymore.
Right.
So these people must be doing it by design. Then you have to go deeper down the rabbit hole. Why are they trying to do this? And I see these little hints in the media. You see things and they say, Trump might lose the election because of the undocumented voters. And I sit and think, are these people really busting their way into America and then urgently trying to find a way to vote? Or are they just letting them in so they can use that as a scam, make up the votes themselves? Don't put me in jail. But they'll just say, oh, this is the undocumented vote. And they'll just print it and write it themselves, and they'll just blame them. These people probably don't even need to vote. They're just the scapegoat for the scamming of the election. That's what I think they're doing it for.
I've been saying this for months. There's only one reason, and this is totally political. They're letting them into the country, and that's to influence the voting.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
They want to turn the entire country blue, the entire country progressive.
Yep.
They never want to get out of power.
Talks about the fentanyl problem.
They showed me a block of fentanyl, maybe 3 times the size of this. Mm-hmm. They said, Michael, this can kill the entire world population. Wow. It's coming over the border and we can't stop it. You know this? You're the president of the United States. You know this, and you don't close the border immediately?
They talk about the LGBTQ. They talk about what it's like to become a person who has a major voice, like an Andrew Tate or like a Michael Franzese, and how they tried to come and cancel you. Because look, I can give my opinion, right? I only have, not even 5,500 subscribers on this channel. I can give my opinion. It's not really going to make a dent. But when an Andrew Tate gives his opinion or Michael Franzese gives his opinion, it's going to influence people because they have a tremendous following on their platforms, a huge following on their platforms. They actually talked about what it was like to actually make some money, make a lot of money, and keep themselves from becoming an elitist or selling out or staying in their own skin, if that makes sense. They talked about politics in the US. They talked about how the legal system works in Romania. This is something that I didn't know about Romania. Not that I know much about Romania, but they don't have a jury in Romania. It's a judge, and the judge says you're innocent or guilty, and that's that. But from what I understand, he says the crime in Romania is very, very, very low. Matter of fact, there's a point where he says he moves to Romania, and he was in the UK before that. He was American, then he moved to the UK, and then he's in Romania. Okay. He says that he was out with his brother in Romania. They went to some nightclub or whatnot, and they see these girls walking home alone. And he goes, there are girls walking home, by themselves to the driver, whatever the Uber driver, whatever it was. And he says, you don't see that in the UK much. Girls don't usually walk home alone. He goes, isn't that dangerous? And the driver said, a Romanian man will not harm a Romanian woman. Where in the United States and in the UK, it's dangerous for a woman to walk home alone. And everybody tells their daughters or nieces or friends that are girls or whomever, or wives, girlfriends, don't walk home alone. Make sure you're with a group. Make sure you're with a group of people. Make sure you're with a guy. Make sure you take an Uber home. Don't trust anybody, which I thought was fascinating. But that's because there's serious consequences, and there's huge patriotism in Romania. There's Romanian, and you only speak Romania, and we stick together, and so on and so forth, which is something you don't see in the United States. The United States and the UK is very divided now. It's more divided now than ever, and they talk about that too. The one part of this interview or conversation that I believe is extremely important, I think every man, every woman, and especially every young man and young woman, but especially the young men, should watch, is they talk about masculinity and how it is under attack and how the lack of masculinity is just destroying the Western society. And they go in depth. They kind of bounce around, but they go in depth. They talked about how the lack of masculinity destroys the nuclear family. And they also talk about that they believe that this is by design. And one of the reasons they say, actually, Andrew Tate discusses this in detail, which I believe myself. If you feminize the men and you create weak men and you have men with no spine, no backbone, well, then they will refuse to uprise when they see something wrong, won't they? They'll basically stick their head in the sand. Where if you have a strong masculine population and they see a country or they see a society that is going in the direction that they don't want it to go in, well, the men are the ones that you're going to have to deal with. And a strong man who is not afraid of confrontation will deal with it. And they will change it. I don't think there is a country that has ever been overtaken by a group of women. It's always men. It's always men that come up to fight. Right? But if you have weak men, then you don't have to deal with that. And then if you make the men emotional, well, then you could literally play society like a violin on emotions. And that's what we see in this country now. Everything is emotion. You know, if you are a masculine man, if you don't want your wife to dress a certain way, if you don't want your wife to go to certain nightclubs, well, you're a misogynist. Well, I don't be labeled a misogynist. Oh, I would never want to do that. If you don't agree with the LGBTQ, well, you're a transphobe. Oh my God. If you don't agree with gay marriage, then you are a homophobe. Oh my, I don't want to be labeled. I don't want to be labeled because if I'm labeled, I'm going to get canceled. I'm going to lose my job and so on and so forth. And then the majority of the population stick their head in the sand and they do not fight back. And only a small percentage will actually fight back. And the ones with the loudest voices usually get canceled, like an Andrew Tate did. But he refuses to shut up. And he actually says that also in the interview, that he can't help it. He truly feels that it is his moral obligation to speak out, which was what is right. And Michael Franzese is the same way. He talks about the Biden administration. He talks about the immigration problem. He talks about how it's destroying society, how when a weak person gets power, like a Joe Biden, how he just becomes corrupt and out for himself. But when you have a strong personality, you have a strong person in power, you have a responsible person in power, and realize that he has the responsibility of so many people like a Donald Trump, then they try to demonize him because they can't control him, and he won't bow to them. He won't bend the knee to the people that actually want to do whatever they're doing to this country to exploit it. And in this conversation, these are the topics that they actually cover, and they cover in great detail. And that section, the masculinity section, the degradation of society, the destruction of nuclear family, every man should listen, should watch. Every young man, especially in their late teens and 20s, should watch it, even in their teenagers. They discuss why men have it so hard today. They discuss how difficult it is being a young man today, which a lot of people don't discuss. People go, oh, yeah, they disregard men's problems, men's issues. And Andrew Tate said, when you are a young man, you have no value, you have no money. Women don't want to know you. And the only way to do that is to build yourself up, right? But in order to build yourself that way, you have to have this masculine frame. You have to be taught, hey, this is what men do. Men work hard. Men provide for their families. Men create value within themselves and with the community around them. Well, you know, young women, their value is kind of instilled in them. You're a beautiful young woman, you're fertile, and that is your value. Men and women are very different. They discuss this. They go into great detail in this conversation about it, which I thought was fascinating, and I thought was extremely important that we get this message across, because what we see in the United States now, and again, they discuss this as well, is they see young men just giving up. They say they see young men basically going, okay, my value is nothing, but I need something. So they smoke weed, or they play video games, or they don't get an education or a trade, and they don't have much discipline and desire to be better than what they are. And on top of that, they talk about the propaganda that is pushed in women's heads about how you don't need a man. I don't need a man. Men are worthless. We don't need men anymore. Which you're just emasculating a man. You're cutting the legs out from under him. And Michael Franzese actually says he has daughters that are very independent, but he says, when you get married, your husband, you should respect and you should look up to, and you should follow his lead. Otherwise, why would you marry a person that is not responsible, a person that you will not respect, a person that is not in his masculine frame, a person that is not ambitious, a person that is not motivational, and a person that is not a leader? And these are all traits and characteristics that we are losing in masculinity today. We are losing in young men in the US and pretty much in Western countries abroad, UK, Australia, so on and so forth. Then from there, they actually go into, because they have these platforms, especially Andrew Tate, and they are educating young men on what they are supposed to do on being a masculine man and being a responsible masculine man. If they think that that is why the powers that be are coming after him and trying to cancel him. And he discusses it, and he agrees, yes. Why else would they do this to me? They tried to get him on human trafficking, and it didn't work because they do not have any really good evidence. He did some time in jail, but in Romania, they basically hold you in jail until they basically have exhausted every piece of information, every piece of evidence, that they can't nail you on anything. It's completely different in the United States. In the United States, you go to jail, they can only hold you up to 48 hours. And then if you are not charged with a crime, you go home. Where in Romania, they will hold you as long as they want until they find something. And they only released him because they didn't find anything. But he's still under scrutiny. He still has to go to court and so on and so forth. And he's still facing possibility of doing 8 to 9 years in prison. And he also discusses that. He discusses how he's mentally going to cope with the fact that he is going to do prison. Then they discuss the difference between prison in the United States and the UK and prison in Romania. The major difference, which I thought was fascinating, is that prison in Romania isn't as violent because there's only Romanians in Romania. You don't have all different types of ethnicities, where in the United States and the UK, you have all these different types of ethnicities. They all stick together and they all try to create power and rulings within the prison. Whereas Romania, they don't have that. But what is worse in Romania is that it is filthy. It is disgusting. There are bed bugs. There are cockroaches. There are rats. There are cockroaches in your food. And he goes on to actually discuss it. And also, being that Andrew Tate is a champion fighter, the majority of guys did not want to fight him. It became a deterrent because everybody knew he was a 3-time kickboxing champion. And again, this is what being masculine is. There was a great line in the movie The Karate Kid, if anybody saw it, I'm sure everybody has seen it. And he says to him, you don't learn how to fight to fight. You learn how to fight so you don't have to fight. And as a kid, when I watched it, I didn't understand it. But now as I get older, I understand it. If people know that you will be defending yourself, whether you can fight, whether you have a gun, whether you, are within your masculine frame, especially if you know how to actually fight, it becomes a deterrent for people that want to start trouble. If I know a person is a champion mixed martial artist, I'm not going to pick a fight with him, right? And that's what happened to him in prison. They knew he was a fighter and they did not want to pick a fight with him. It was truly, really, truly a fascinating interview. Then toward the end, they actually discussed Trump versus Biden. They discussed the U.S. collapse and civilization collapse in general and what it's actually going to look like. And this was actually a really, really good conversation because Andrew Tate is a little bit more worldly than Michael Franzese because Andrew Tate has lived in more countries than Michael, which is really strange because the conversation went like this. In the United States or in the UK, if anything goes wrong, immediately there are riots, crime goes up, so on and so forth. The slightest thing could go wrong. But there are countries where things go wrong and life just continues. Crime doesn't go up. Riots don't happen. And he discusses it because Andrew Tate believes, and when he explained it, it made so much sense that it made me believe, is the countries that have God and the countries that don't have God is the difference. The United States used to be, a very Christian country, but there are people that say they're Christian, but they don't follow Christianity. They just claim it, but they don't follow any of the rules or regulations. And when you don't worship something higher than you, you are going to be doomed to worship yourself. So what can I get out of this? And those countries usually end up in chaos. But there are countries that are Muslim countries that are extremely poor, according to Andrew Tate, but the crime is low. And he says it's because they have God, because they have religion, and because they follow the religion thoroughly. I truly recommend everybody go and watch this interview. I know it's 2 hours and 45 minutes long, but it is two men from two different parts of the globe who have two different total world experiences. But they are men of great respect. They command great respect. And it is fascinating to see how many things they actually agree on. And it just goes to show you that if you are a real man and you bask in your masculinity and you have a masculine frame, it doesn't matter if you are from a third world country or you are from the United States, you are going to have the same belief system. So that's it for me. Thank you, guys. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get all this great content that I'm telling you about. All right. Later, guys. Peace.